Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call to order the June 26, 2024 meeting of the Fond du Lac City Council. The first item of business is roll call, which is done electronically, and I will declare a quorum is present, and I know Mr. Schisler is on his way. So, next item on our agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance, which is followed by a moment of silent reflection. Please rise. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Next on our agenda is public hearings, and we have none. Next, we will move on to the consent agenda. The consent agenda finalizes the proposed actions for the meeting. A, June 12th, 2024 minutes, and B, list of claims dated June 19th, 2024. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion.
Motion to approve.
Motion by Mr. Godfrey.
I'll second.
And second by Mr. Zimmerman. Is there any other discussion or questions? I'll just give Mr. Schisler a second to get situated. Okay, all right. We will then proceed to vote. And that passes unanimously, thank you. Next on our agenda is audience comments, agenda and non-agenda items. The presiding officer will limit speaking time for non-agenda items to 1 minute and items noticed on the agenda to 5 minutes. Ms. Hefter, do we have anyone wishing to speak?
We do not.
We do not. So that ends our audience comments. Next, we will move on to our action items. Action item A, City Clerk dated June 19th, 2024, annual alcohol beverage license renewals. Our introduction is by our City Clerk, Ms. Hefter.
Thank you, President Brault. The list presented to you includes license applications that were filed their renewal after the first due date of May 10th. Renewal applications were published in the Reporter on June 9th, 10th, and 11th for the purpose of notifying the public and pending action and to invite comment. All licenses have been inspected by the Fire Department and City Inspection Department. No license will be granted to any license holder for which any money is delinquent and unpaid to the city or a wholesaler. City staff recommends approval of the renewal list presented to you, and 2 licenses will expire on June 30th, did not file their renewal timely, and those will be presented to you at the July 10th meeting.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Ms. Hefter? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion.
I'll move approval.
Mo-
I'll second it.
Motion by Mr. Heisler and second by Mr. Godfrey. Are there any other questions or discussion? Seeing none, please proceed to vote. And that passes unanimously. Item B, permit to sell fermented malt beverages on park property, entity Casa Guadalupe Education Center, Inc., event Sabor a Mexico Festival, location Lakeside Park, Oven Island, dates August 9th and 10th, 2024. And again, our introduction is by our City Clerk, Ms. Hefter.
Thank you again. Casa Guadalupe Education Center is requesting to sell fermented malt beverages on park property on August 9th and 10th for their annual Sabor a Mexico Festival. Chapter 486 in our municipal code states that during festivals approved by City Council that fermented malt beverages shall be permitted in all areas reserved for festival activities and no alcohol should be carried into that area. A special event application has been submitted and approved and City staff recommends approval.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Ms. Hefter? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion. Motion by Mr. Mullen and second by Mr. Schisler. Are there any other questions or discussion? Seeing none, please proceed to vote. And that passes unanimously. Item C is resolution number 9134, a resolution waiving the prohibition against possession of alcoholic beverages on specified public ways for Class B license for Fat Joe's Burgers and Brews on September 7th, 2024 for Fondue Fest. And our introduction again is by our City Clerk, Ms. Hefter.
Thank you again. Fat Joe's is requesting the city to waive the possession of alcoholic beverages on public streets and expand their premises description for Fondue Fest on September 7th, 2024 on Division Street from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. No glass containers or carry-ins are permitted in the designated area. Applicant must post signs, no alcohol beyond the special event area, and must have monitoring for compliance. City staff has approved the special event application and recommends approval.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Ms. Hefter? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion.
I'll second.
Motion by Mr. Schussler and second by Mr. Zimmerman. Are there any other questions or discussion? Seeing none, please proceed to vote. And that passes unanimously. Item D is resolution number 9135, a resolution making an appointment to the Fond du Lac Public Library Board. And our introduction is our city manager, Mr. Moore.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. This is a nomination for Ms. Lauren Herlock for our library board for the next 3 years to fulfill a midterm vacancy. John Mark Bolthouse also recommends approval, as do I.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Are there any questions? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion.
I'll move approval of 9135.
Motion by Mr. Heisler and second by Mr. Godfrey. Are there any other questions or discussion? Seeing none, please proceed to vote. And that passes unanimously. Item E is Resolution 9136, a resolution granting a privilege in the street to Mark One Company LLC in a portion of Satterley Street. And our introduction is by our Public Works Director, Mr. DeVries.
Thank you, President Brolt. For those of you not familiar, privilege in the street is something where we would allow a private entity, adjacent property owner, to have something, an obstruction, whether it's stairs or maybe a sign or something in public right-of-way. And normally, we wouldn't want to do that, obviously. We want to keep that clear for our improvements or anything else that the city would want to use that land for. In this case, this one is located over on Satterley Street, which is Sadoff Iron and Metal, if you're familiar, just north of Johnson Street and bounded by Arndt Street as well. They have a piece of equipment that right now is a very challenging access to get either a response team there or employees to exit safely. So they've requested to put stairs in the right-of-way along Satterley Street. And on that side, if you looked at the map in the agenda packet, there's no sidewalk there right now, and we don't have room to put sidewalk there, nor would we plan to put sidewalk there in the future. So with that, engineering recommended approval, as did community development, so I would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. DeVries. And we have questions from Mr. Mullen.
Yes, those steps, they end before they actually hit the curb, right?
Correct,
So they would not interfere with snow removal or
correct.
anything like that.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from council? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion.
I'll second.
Motion by Mr. Mullen and second by Mr. Heisler. Are there any other questions or discussion? Seeing none, please proceed to vote. And that passes unanimously. Thank you. And with that, that ends our input items. So that ends our action items. We'll move on to our input items. First is update on Class C wine and Class B license requirements presented by our city attorney, Ms. Hoffman.
Thank you. I did a memo. We have a draft ordinance in front of you, too. You don't have to do anything with it tonight. This is just your first view of it so that you have a chance to understand what's going on. And there's 3 sections in front of the draft ordinance I've given you. One, in section 1, it's dealing with serving minors, and that's pulling stuff from the current state code into our code. We already had done that by reference, but this is like making it abundantly clear to everyone what we expect regarding not serving minors alcohol. The second is for Class Bs, where we have a business. You can't have, like, the code, the state code limits the types of different businesses that can be together and have liquor licenses. And again, we adopted the state code by reference. What we've done here is spell it out to, again, make it clearer, because we've had some businesses be somewhat confused. So this was, again, attempting to reduce that confusion and make it clear. And then the last one is dealing with the Class Cs, which that is arising from, there is a very large alcohol, intoxicating beverages and alcohol licensing law that was passed by the state legislature. Some of those laws went into effect this year, more will go into effect in 2025. So I will be bringing back more things to you as I work through how we're going to manage all the rest of that stuff, because our code is incorrect now, frankly, because of some of those law changes. But most of that doesn't start till 2025, so we've got some time. But the Class C, it started now. In the past, a Class C it's a wine license, but it had to be part of a restaurant. They've removed that from the code. So now any business can have it, and we didn't have any regulation or guidelines as how, where that's appropriate and what kind of rules they have to follow. So that's what we've attempted to put into the code, so that they still have to get their liquor. Again, it's required under state law, but to make it clear, from a wholesaler, an approved wholesaler, they still have to have someone that is a certified operator, serving it. You can't overserve, you can't serve minors. All the rules that apply for all the other liquor licenses also apply for this Class C, but we've spelled it out. So that's what you have in front of you, and I welcome any questions.
Thank you. And we have some questions from Mr. Schisler.
What was the purpose of the schedule, if any business can?
Those would be the types of businesses that we thought would be appropriate, for a Class C.
The city can limit the businesses?
We can. I mean, I get what I was trying to think is like businesses where you would not want that person like repairing your car if they've been drinking. Things where it seemed incongruous to put the two together. So we will, and I worked with zoning too. Diane helped me with the list and what seemed like an appropriate list of businesses where it would be appropriate to be serving a glass of wine to your customers.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from council? Well, I guess just kind of jumping off Mr. Schisler's question, have you had any inquiries from businesses that you might not expect would want to serve wine that would be kind of unusual?
No, we've had one Class C get issued, I think, right, Maggie?
There are some boutiques that have inquired about it.
Yeah.
The potential.
So, I mean, I think it might be a good, addition to our business district. I hope it'll be. I hope it'll be a useful thing. Let's see.
I mean, yeah, it might be interesting for some businesses to try out. I guess I was also just wondering, so is this part of the legislation that was referred to kind of as the wedding barn legislation? Is that part of this? Okay. So I'm just kind of, I think a lot of people might be familiar with that part of the legislation, so yeah.
Yeah, and like I said, we will have more coming because they really changed that part of the law regarding breweries, distilleries, and wineries. They can now, if they have a brewery license, which they get from Madison, that doesn't come from us, they can also have full-service retail outlets. They can have a permanent placement outlet. They can sell at their brewery. So that's two, and then they can also have a moving one. So they could have like a truck or something, or a pop-up store that they can move around. But the municipality has the ability to regulate those full-service retail outlets. So I will be working on that and bringing that back to you.
All right, are there any other questions from council? Well, thank you so much for all the work that you've started doing on this and the work that you will continue to do. I'm sure there's lots of changes that we have to look at, so thank you so much for bringing this piece of it to us.
Thank you.
And next, we will move on to item B, 2025 budget overview, which will be presented by City Manager Mr. Moore and Director of Administration Ms. Davey.
Thank you very much. I always like to start with an attention-getting headline. So tonight's attention-getting headline is, I think the various city budgets and the decisions you make about them are the most important decisions you can make because they resource everything you want to do and everything we need to do in support of what it is you want to do. So tonight, Tricia Davey and I are going to give you an overview of what we see for 2025 and the primarily the operating budget, although I'm going to make reference to some of our other budgets, as well as some references to the capital improvement plan, because I would offer to you that the one area that you can have the most influence as a governing body is your priorities that inform the capital improvement plan. And so with that, we'll begin. Next, please. Thanks, Tessa. I'll start with probably the most important thing any governing body in the public sector would ever want to hear, which is this. Our operating budget is in balance. We have equilibrium between our expenditures and our revenues. That's been the case for quite some time, although, as you heard me say a couple of years ago, there was a threat to that because of the shared revenue challenges that we saw. That's been fixed by the legislature. So our budget's balanced. We forecast that our operating budget next year will be balanced. Our wastewater budget will be balanced, our water budget will be balanced, and our solid waste budget will be balanced, as will the rest of our budgets. Now, for the operating budget, that gets the most headlines because why? That's the one that's supported by shared revenue and property taxes. And everybody that owns property has a real deep interest in what any governing body is going to do to their taxes, right? And so what I'm telling you here is, based on our forecast for net new construction, which is really the only thing that moves the revenue side for property taxes for the municipal operating budget, we see 1%. So from this point forward, when you hear public works presentation, public safety, community development, every time you hear us talk about doing something new, paying people more, think about 1% and know that inside our budget, we're working the problem, so to speak, because in these days with inflation, anybody who tells you they can only move something 1%, they've got to do some other things to make it all work. So 1% is kind of the guiding principle for 2025 operating budget as far as the revenue side and thus the expenditure side. Next, please, Tessa. So one way to look at what you prioritize is what you spend your money on. And so what I've done here is shared with you 3 different sections of our operating budget. Start with the left, although I didn't put a dollar figure there. We generally recommend that the city allocate $2.5 million or so to support the library. The library's got its own independent budget, but we found it very useful to support the library with an allocation from the city of Fond du Lac. Then there's an area that in state statute and in our budgeting we call general government. That's that first big box with the city attorney, human resources, IT, and Tricia Davies' department, and which includes Maggie and the clerk's office. You see, we've allocated of our $37.9 million, $3.2 million to general government. Over the past few years, we've been super tight. We have not allowed that to grow at all. And then for our operating departments, you see those there. That's where our priorities have been, to support public safety, public works, and community development. Now, I will refer a little bit in more detail about that box I've put on the bottom, because where we spend most of our money in the operating budget is on people. Makes sense, right? We have 315 full-time positions. 264 of those are in the operating budget, the general operating budget, the budget that's supported by property taxes and shared revenue and some other ancillary revenues that Tricia will talk about. 147 of those positions are covered by labor agreements, and the rest are essentially what we call general employees. And I will come back to that after Tricia's done, because I have one initiative for 2025 I want to talk about regarding those general employees. Next, please. This is just a reminder of the change with shared revenue that the legislature and the governor accomplished. It was very beneficial to municipalities large and small. What you see on the left, and the reason this is important is because shared revenue is such a substantial source of revenue for municipalities. So you see over this century how shared revenue was kind of bleeding down. That's the allocation we were receiving from the state. That all changed last year, and you see the bounce from 2023 to 2024. That essentially got us to where we were 24 years ago, but that's not a complaint because we had figured out how to operate sort of with the shared revenue as we were dealing with it. Although, as you can see on the right, we were allocating more and more reserves, especially right before the pandemic. So this wasn't due to the pandemic, this was due to the way shared revenue was being allocated. From 2019 forward, we were using ever more shared revenue. That was starting to present a risk to what I opened with, which was that we have a balanced budget. So that's a very good news story. We're in really good shape, and we've already seen our reserves replenished to some extent this year as a result of what I've just told you. Next, please. So here is your summary budget for this year, 2024. You know, it's a good place to start when you're talking about the next year, because if I told you we can only move 1%, we've got to solve a lot of small challenges within the budget. It won't be that much different next year. But I wanted to point out to you the significance of the shared revenue application. Look in 2023, not sustainable when we are allocating $3 million of our reserves to balance the budget. Just not good, and certainly not sustainable. This year, we're a balanced budget. When you're at 139,000, that's less than 1/3%. That's a balanced budget. And so you can see down below in the expenditures, again, just a reminder how we've prioritized. So almost 92% of our operating budget goes to support the operating departments that you can see there in that box: public safety, public works, parks, et cetera, and community development. General government is just under 9% for $37.9 million. So we'll be a little bit above that in 2025, but it'll be balanced and it'll work pretty much the same way. We're not going to change those priorities. Next, please. Yes, I want to focus on talking about our people for just a moment and the way we fund our employment. So in an operating budget of a little over $37 million, a little over $31 million of that is allocated for pay and benefits in the general operating fund. That makes sense. About 82% of the general operating budget is allocated for personnel costs. After Trish is done with her part, I'm going to come back to that thought and talk to you a little bit about an initiative for 2025. Now, I had also mentioned we have some other budgets. Paul's going to be talking about those at the next meeting because that'll be the first departmental budget discussion you have, and that's coming from Public Works. So in addition to Paul DeVries and Public Works' general operating budgets, we also have a wastewater budget, which is funded by ratepayers, not taxpayers. Water budget, which is also funded by ratepayers, not taxpayers. Solid waste, which is a fancy phrase for trash and bulky waste, that's all funded by fees, not taxpayers. And then transit, funded mostly by the federal government, a little bit by the levy and fares. And so those are some of the other budgets Paul will be talking about. But I'm going to talk about specifically about what we are paying people after Tricia is done. Next, please. So you've got to have some priorities to form a budget. These have been our priorities for the last 3 years. The first 4 that I have highlighted in yellow are essentially found and reflected in our capital improvement plan. The last one, which is deliver operational excellence, that's an umbrella statement that applies to law enforcement, public works, the city manager, the city attorney, human resources, et cetera. And so that's our operating budget, focusing on delivering operational excellence. Those first 4, residential development, commercial development, recreation assets, and infrastructure, that's all getting supported via the capital improvement plan. Next, please. Now I'm going to turn this over to Tricia. She's going to get in a bit more detail, and then when she's done, I'll wrap it up.
Great, thank you. So there are 4 main components to our budget process that I'll be going over tonight. How much can the tax levy increase? What are our revenues? What financial resources does each department need to carry out c mission and priorities? And fund balance. How much do we need to apply to balance the budget? Next slide. So the first component is tax levy. We've talked about net new construction, and we know that our tax levy can only increase by that amount, or it's 1.1%. And using the state levy limit formula, that means our tax levy itself can only increase by $300,000. So the pie chart on this slide shows how small of an impact a $300,000 increase has on our overall budget. With wages and benefit increases being higher than 1.1%, the focus of the budget becomes affordability. You'll hear that, you've heard that tonight, and you'll hear it some more. And then over the summer, you'll also be hearing that from the departments as they make their presentations to you. So we'll focus on the rest of the revenues on this slide and using the pie chart in the lower right-hand corner. So between our tax levy at 40% and our state shared revenues of 37%, that blue portion of the pie chart represents 77% of our revenue base. Other than what net new construction can do for our tax levy, which we know from the previous slide is an increase of about $300,000, there really isn't much else within that blue section that's within our control. So that leaves us with the orange section and the green sections. The orange section of other revenues, which is 10% of our revenues, includes items like interest income. And this is another section over which we don't have a whole lot of control. For example, we don't have much influence over the interest rates that our banks give us on the money that we have in the bank. So we've just identified between the blue and the orange sections that we have little to no control over about 87% of the revenues that we receive, which leaves us with the green section, which is our fee-based revenues. These are things like fines, licenses, and permits, and is really the only segment where we have direct influence on our revenues. But though we do have direct influence, it's a balancing act on how we should set our fees. If we raise our fees too high, for example, on building permits, it may discourage contractors from developing in our area because they're not pulling permits and paying for them, so that in turn affects the revenues that we thought we were going to be getting. And that could also affect our net new construction, because again, if contractors are not pulling permits and doing the construction, we're not getting those new structures built within the city. So we have about the 13% area that we have some direct control over. Now on to expenditures. So as Joe pointed out at the beginning, people make up 82% of our budget, so it's no surprise that wages and benefits are our single largest expense. And since we have collective bargaining agreements in place for 2025 with our represented groups, we know what our wage increases will be for those different groups. For the non-represented employees, increases are based upon two components, wage scale and steps. So the first part of the increase, or that 2%, will be made to the general wage scale. Within that wage scale, it's made up of different grades, so that entire scale goes up by that 2%. Within the grades are individual steps, and those are based on an employee's length of service. So for example, if I've been in my position for 2 years, I'd be at a step 2 this year, and then next year would move up to a step 3. And the increase between individual steps is about 2.5%. So the entire wage scale going up 2.5% or 2%, and me personally going from a step 2 to a step 3, which would be another 2.5%, I would be eligible for a total increase next year of 4.5%. Steps do max out. There we go. So an employee that has been in their position longer than 11 years would just get that initial 2% wage scale adjustment. We can afford the 2% given our current revenue restraints, and our ability to consider an increase above that will depend on the revenues estimates provided by the state, which we will get sometime in July and August. So increasing the wage scale for non-represented from 2% to 3% would be an additional $150,000 in expenditures. Once we receive our state estimates, if we determine we can afford that $150,000, we will adjust the non-represented increase from the 2% to the 3%. Departments have also submitted their budget requests for materials, supplies, and equipment. So with that, along with the wages and benefits, we know all of our expenditure realities for 2025. This is where affordability becomes very important in the context of our allowable levy increase and the other revenue numbers that we discussed. So knowing what we do know about revenues and expenditures, the next question becomes, can we afford those expenditure realities given our revenue constraints? The answer is yes, and that leads me to the fund balance bullet. So fund balance is a tool used to balance our budget. And since fund balance operates similar to a personal savings account, we need to be careful in how we use it. If we deplete our fund balance or use too much of it, we don't have that savings account cushion that we should if something unexpected happens. And we would also violate our policy of having a reserve of 15%. If we don't use any of it, though, in order to balance the budget, we'd need to reduce services so that we could reduce our expenditures, because we know we don't have a whole lot of control over the revenues that we receive. So we find a compromise between depleting our fund balance and not using any of it, which keeps our fund balance at a healthy level, complies with our policy, and allows us to afford our expenditure realities. The amount of fund balance that we'll be using in 2025 is on par what we've used in 2024, or around $140,000, and it preserves our fund balance policy. Another note on the importance of fund balance is when we go out to borrow money for our capital improvement plan and our projects, our fund balance reserves are one of the first things that a rating agency will look at when they're determining our credit score. And they actually prefer to see our level at about 20 to 25%. So we've been through our tax levy, our revenues, our expenditures, and our fund balance. And what does all this mean for 2025? Though I've mentioned revenue constraints and affordability, the news on the budget is not bad. We will continue to provide our current level of municipal services, as Joe mentioned. And in August, you will be presented with a budget that is balanced with no issues or shortfalls that you will need to resolve. Next slide. I'll talk a little bit about the capital improvement plan. I'm not going to steal the thunder of the departments and talk about specific projects, but I want to highlight a couple of our continued investments. I won't read the entire list, but in park amenities, we've made millions of dollars of investments in parks over the last few years, and we'll be continuing those investments, but on a smaller scale. And for housing, we'll be proposing a different approach and another approach to assist with housing development within the community, and Ms. Benson will talk about that when she provides her presentation. And the last thing I want to mention about this capital improvement plan is that you'll notice a change in the list when you receive it when it comes to vehicles, primarily for fire engines. It will appear in the capital improvement plan that we're going to be getting $1 million fire engines in back-to-back years, and that's not the case. With production schedules now being 4 to 5 years out, we've had to kind of change our approach to how we order those and how we fund those vehicles. So if we order them in 2025 and 2026, we hope to actually receive them not until 2029, between there and 2031. So we're kind of changing that approach so we can get those orders in much sooner. Next slide. This is a list of our budget schedule for the rest of the year. So here we are on June 26th with the first item in the list. In July and August, the departments will deliver their budget presentations to you, and this will be your opportunity to provide feedback to them on their missions. Later in August, we'll publish the budget and the CIP and provide hardbound copies. In September, we'll hold a special city council deliberation meeting. So in September, we'll actually meet three Wednesdays in a row, because that meeting is an off-cycle meeting. In October, we will have public hearings on the city budget. In November, council will adopt the budget and approve the capital improvement plan. And then by the third Monday in December, we will mail out the property tax bills. Next slide. So in summary, we have a comprehensive, balanced budget. We continue to provide our current level of municipal services. We have an affordable and sustainable use of fund balance, and we have targeted capital improvement plan investments in public amenities, facilities, development, and our infrastructure. Next slide. So I will turn it back over to Mr. Moore.
Thank you. And for Ms. Loring and Mr. Godfrey, I just wanted to mention to you that in years past, we've gotten awards for the way we've constructed our budget, the way we've overseen our budget. Our budget, the way we put it together, is used as an example at UW-Oshkosh and the MPA program. So I'm giving you high hopes that you will get a good document that's understandable, and I would encourage you, as I've encouraged other council members throughout the years, that if you hear anything at all from me, the department heads, that causes a question, please ask. It's really, really important because we'll get you that answer so that you can make a fully formed decision. Tricia alluded to the idea that we're putting in a 2% salary adjustment into the budget right now. She told you that a percent increase beyond that will cost $150,000. As I'm sitting here right now, my objective is to get us from 2% to 3%. But we're working with a number at 2% that will work. We're waiting to see, as Tricia said, and the reason I'm emphasizing this is because I'm going to talk about wages going forward. we'll find out some refined numbers about shared revenue and some of the other inputs from the state that may give us some room to move from 2% to 3%. But I don't want to start high and move backward. I'd rather start lower and move forward to the extent we can. So that's where we are with that. You're also going to see in the budget a proposal that we're making to fund a wage analysis, salary analysis, by virtue of hiring a consultant right out of the gate in 2025, because it's supported by the 2025 budget, to do an analysis of what we're paying those 168 positions. Let's not think about people right now, just the full-time equivalent positions that we have. What we've done in the past 10 or so years is each summer we've asked the department heads, and also with HR's input, because they see the challenges with recruitments to the extent that there have been any, how long recruitments are taking, how successful our recruitments are, and we identify various professions within our sort of job structure that may need to be what we call reclassified. In other words, we may be not paying enough, just to put it in real simple terms. And each summer we've submitted a few of those based on the feedback we've gotten from departments. But after a decade of doing that, it appears that we may need to look at the entirety of our 168 non-union full-time equivalent positions. And so we're going to propose to fund that analysis in 2025. Now, the umbrella over that initiative is the results will come to us from the consultant based on the job descriptions we provide them for all 168 positions, feedback HR gives them, feedback the department heads give to them, et cetera, and they're going to come back and tell us what the market is for each of those professions, from top to bottom, bottom to top, everybody in the 100, or every position in those 168. So you may be asked by some of our employees, what's that mean? Well, it means that we might find out we're paying people most of our positions exactly right, might find out we're below market, might find out we're above market. I would doubt that, but, and the reason I say that is because we've seen recruitments take longer and applicant lists get shorter. So those two things combined give us some signals that tell us this is something that we at least ought to consider. So I wanted you to know that, because you may run into employees who wonder about this because they've heard me or department heads talk about it. It's going to be proposed in the budget that we fund this analysis in 2025. And then there'll come times in 2025 when we're giving you in-progress reviews about that, because this time next year, we will have a recommendation based on that feedback we've gotten. We'll need it this time next year so that we can inform the 2026 budget, because to the extent we would apply any of the recommendations from the consultant, it would go in effect on 1 January 2026 with the 2026 budget. So, this is going to be of great interest to our employees, perhaps potential employees as well. And so I wanted you to know that going in. But there'll be an explanation about all of that in the budget memo, an allocation to fund the study. And then one thing that we always are interested in doing is focusing with a disciplined approach on affordability. So people have asked me, what happens if they recommend that certain positions ought to increase by some unusual amount? My answer's been, depends on affordability. So we will cross those bridges as we come to them, and we will make it work inside the 2026 budget. We've been super disciplined about the 2025 budget proposal, as you're going to hear over the next few meetings, and with the budget that you get in 2 months. And we've done that because we want to create a little wiggle room for the potential recommendations for the wage analysis. In other words, we don't want to gobble up the use of a bunch of fund balance in 2025, only to, in 2026, wish we hadn't done that, because we might want to allocate some of those funds to support the results of a wage analysis. So just so you know the thought process on that. So we've talked for a while, shared a lot of numbers and a lot of thoughts. Any questions that you have, any guidance you'd like to share? Any thoughts?
Thank you so much for the presentation, Mr. Moore, Ms. Davy, and we will start, oh, Mr. Mullen, sorry, I'm sorry. I missed that. Maggie had pushed the button already for you, so Mr. Mullen, you can start with the questions.
Well, thank you. Do we have an approximate number on the shared revenue increase?
Not at this time, no.
No, you remember last year how I said the biggest change, there was the supplemental aid. So there was the shared revenue and then supplemental aid that was divvied out to all the municipalities. But the biggest change was it was going to be indexed to sales tax. And that result won't be published by the Department of Revenue for,
Probably till like mid-August.
yeah, so we're probably 6 weeks away from seeing what that is. That's going to be the increase of that supplemental
I
aid.
thought we had a kind of initial guesstimate of 1.4 million. Is that right?
Well, that's what we received. That was our supplemental aid. What I'm referring to is how much that might grow. This will be the first year that it can grow based on sales tax. And all indications are sales tax moved in a positive direction. I've been watching that, both for the county and the state. So I would expect that number to go up, but we just don't know what it is. So we haven't assumed anything into the revenue side from it.
That's all I got for now. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Mr. Schussler.
If the levy increase is limited to 1%, how do we pay for all these expenses that are going to exceed 1%?
Well, that's why I don't have an assistant anymore. That's why we may defer the purchase of certain capital items that we would pay for with cash rather than borrowing, right? Because we wouldn't, for example, we wouldn't buy a squad car with 10-year debt because we're not going to keep it 10 years. But that is an area where we, not to say that we wouldn't buy a patrol car, but it's something in that vein that we would consider, right? That's how we balance that to some extent, Mr. Schussler. And there are, as Tricia referred to, you have direct control over about 13% of the revenue based on fees and things. So we may make some recommendations about that. And then lastly, because, for years, throughout the teens of the last decade, we earned almost nothing in interest. We have millions of dollars in the bank. I mean, that's part of our cash flow, right? That's how we operate as a large organization. Now that our interest rate is multiplied by 5x, we're seeing a significant growth in interest, so that's helpful too. And Tricia referred to that as a piece of that pie chart, but that chunk has gotten bigger because we have more revenue from the interest on the city's money in the bank. So that's been helpful too.
One other question. We're self-funded for health insurance.
Yes.
So how can you do any planning if that's the case?
Well, Deb and Tricia and I are kind of an insurance company too. We spend a lot of time with some consultants forecasting what medical inflation, drug inflation, all of those things are going to look like in 2025. And what we strive for is to set the premiums for ourselves as the employer and for our employees so that we are running a break-even insurance business. Since we're self-funded, we don't have to make money to invest that money, like a private insurer does. So that's our goal every year, is to set the premium so that we're operating at a break-even. In that, rarely do you land exactly on that at the end of the year. And so in years where we spend less than we forecast, in other words, we as an employer paid ourselves more premium than we needed to, and our employees paid more premiums than would have been required at break even, that becomes fund balance in our health insurance fund that we can apply the following year for consideration and offsetting premium increases. So that's kind of how we do it in the big picture, but we spent a lot of time looking at those things. and also trying to find efficiencies, because right now, it's a dog-eat-dog world with consultants in the health insurance business. There are so many efforts and initiatives to make changes to health insurance plans, to evaluate physician performance, to evaluate different tiers of drugs, and it's amazing how much change is going on in the health insurance sector right now. And we're right in the middle of all that. We have a number of meetings we've been attending and have more on the horizon to set the rates for next year. But again, it's all about being break even. And so when Tricia was talking to you about the expenditures and personnel expenditures being 82%, our allocation for health insurance is inside of that 82%. That's one of the benefits that we budget for. And so again, our effort there is to just break even.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Davey, did you have something to?
Nope, I'm good.
Okay. All right, Mr. Zimmerman.
Thank you, Ms. Brault. I just want to say I really appreciate you moving forward with the wage study. It's been brought up a lot. I think it shows we care about our employees.
Right.
And what we do with that information is up to us. You know, I think it's great we gather the information. Doesn't mean we're just going to jack everybody's raises up. It's up to us to decide what we're going to do with it. But we can't decide to do anything if we don't know. So I think it's very telling that we care about our employees, and I think they'll be very appreciative of it. And thank you for moving forward with it.
You bet. Thanks, Mr. Zimmerman.
Thank you. Mr. Heisler.
Thank you. Mr. Moore, just a quick question to kind of piggyback off what Mr. Zimmerman was just talking about, because thank you so much for all that information, by the way. There's a lot there, but it's nice to be able to unpack it in small chunks, and this helps set the table for what I think will be some really great budget presentations from our department heads. Along those same lines, I know you've had a lot of discussions with the department heads already about their budgets, and also, I'm sure, about the wage study. Can you give me some general bullet points as to how the feelings have been from the department heads so far? Is there concern, or is everybody just kind of taking a wait and see approach? Where are things at right now with the department heads and how they're feeling?
There's concern. There's a feeling that we have applied a level of discipline on the non-personnel expenditures that is moderately painful. We can do every mission we have, and we can do it at a high quality, but it really does limit expansion. And so, for example, if Ms. Duvenet could wave a magic wand, she would have an authorization to hire another person for a specific number of reasons. It's not that she's not able to do what another position would help her do. It would make her, I think, more comfortable in being able to provide those services. But at this point, we haven't assumed that into the budget. We haven't included that. And the reason why is because we're trying to be disciplined, focus on affordability, and we know we can get the job done, but it doesn't give her any latitude to have identified that desire and then be told, not right now.
Got it. Appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Leering.
Yeah, I have a question about the wage study. I wanted to say, I think it's a great idea. We just completed one for the county not long ago. It was very much appreciated and long overdue, I think 23 years. So I feel like that's a good way to go. It also helps with employee retention to do one of those. I'm just wondering, what's the timeline, and can you give a few other details about the wage study?
Sure. So again, we're talking non-union. This is our general employees, and it will apply to all 168 general employee positions. The timeline is that if you approve the budget with that in it, then our budget goes live on the 1st of January of every year. So the money, that funding authorization you would be providing would go live on 1 January. We would be immediately issuing requests for qualification in the consultant world to help, to find someone to help us do the analysis. And generally what they would do is look at our job descriptions for each of those full-time equivalents, make sure they understand what they are, what we're telling them. And these are companies that work in the public sector, so this isn't difficult. That would take place in the first quarter of 2025. And after that, the consultant we hire is looking at the marketplace and comparing our pay with what the market is, frankly. I mean, that's what they do. I think that for us, it will be a mix of a look at the public and the private sector because, for example, in Public Works, many of our full-time equivalent positions are found in the private sector. I mean, so we're competing directly with the private sector in some cases, and in other cases not. So that'll take place in the first quarter of 2025, and then from March until June, it'll be an evaluation of what the results are. Right? We'll start to get feedback from the consultant because we're going to dictate their deadlines back to us. And then we will apply that to the 2026 budget recommendation. So if anyone was to see an sort of unexpected change in their salary, it would go into effect on the 1st of January of 2026.
Okay. I have another question about it. So when we did the wage study for the county, we did the same thing. We compared with other counties, so it would be the same as comparing with other municipalities.
Mm-hmm.
We also looked at the job descriptions and had to update some of those. I think the company updated some of those.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering if the company or the consultants that you'll choose, one thing I'd like you to consider is the availability of the data. We weren't able to look at the data. I know the company tried to protect some of their formulas, and I understand that, but I think it's really important to see some of the data that they use in determining the figures for the wage study.
Right, and what you'll find is that these companies will not disclose some of their own data that is theirs and theirs alone, because it would put them at a competitive disadvantage to disclose those things. But we'll have enough information to share with you from them about their methodology, their rationale, et cetera, but they're not going to show you their database, right? That would be like giving away their intellectual capital, so to speak. So just to set expectations, there'll be a lot of transparency. And Deb, I think you'd agree, there's going to be part of that they're just not going to share. That's theirs and theirs alone. But, and that's okay. I mean, there's plenty of information that will be available to look at to make a good decision.
Okay, thank you. Just as long as we're as transparent as can be.
Sure.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Mr. Godfrey.
You just answered the question that I was going to ask, but I will just say thank you for always making sure we all understand what's going on. I mean, I've sat behind you listening to a lot of these and then to make sure that we understand it. And this will be my first time sitting here to making an informed decision. So just thank you guys and all of you for just doing always an amazing job in making sure that we have the best information to make our informed decisions. And I didn't want to be the only one that didn't say anything. So.
Well, thank you.
Your turn.
Well, and I'll just start by echoing what Mr. Godfrey said. Thank you so much for starting the process here and kind of giving us a launch pad to understand all of the presentations that we're going to see as they come through. I think for all of us, maybe the biggest point of interest right now is the wage study, because knowing that our people are 82% of what we're spending and wanting to make sure that we're compensating them fairly. I guess one of my questions about the wage study, is it going to just look at wages, or are we also going to be looking at benefit packages?
Almost, the focus is going to be on what we're paying people. Our benefits, we can, internally, we understand how competitive we are in that regard, and we don't have any worries there. But if the consultant were to point out a deficiency, sure. I mean, we're not going to withhold that, but I don't think we feel the need to have them take a deep dive into the variety of things, because it's very easy to see. We can look at, for example, health insurance. I can get premium information from any other municipality very easily. I can look at deductibles, max out-of-pockets, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, we can do that. We don't need that much help, because although sometimes it's difficult to make sure you do an apples-to-apples comparison with health insurance, once you've determined how to do that, it's pretty easy. You can compare and then assign yourself sort of where do you fit in terms of the generous side of the health plan or the competitive side of it, et cetera. And then as far as vacation, that's easy we can obtain that ourselves very easily. That's all public information. The part we're really needing, and every private and public sector firm needs help with this, which is, as Ms. Loring was referring to, is getting all that competitive data about pay. That's hard to get, frankly. And because I can't walk into Mercury and say, how much are you paying people? That's just not a conversation that they're going to have. But companies can obtain that. They have, by virtue of relationships and such, and they build their databases. So that's really what our focus is, and why we would hire somebody to help us figure out whether or not we're in the right spot in the market with our 168 FTEs.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's really helpful to understand it better. And I also just want to say I really appreciate that you're looking ahead at how we would fund the potential wage, potential increases if we see people need to move up. So knowing that we're trying to be conservative with our use of fund balance this year to project possible increases next year, I really appreciate that. That's how we're looking ahead, so that we make sure that we are paying people fairly if we see that there are discrepancies.
Sure.
And I think just one other question, because I've already had some people asking specifically about investments in street projects. People are always, concerned about how their streets are going to be funded. I guess I was just curious if you've looked at what you're projecting for the CIP for 2025 might compare to previous investments in street projects.
I think it's about the same. I don't think it's that you would look at our program for 25 and find it's significantly different. The years where we have an uptick are the years where we're partnering with the county for county roads inside the city limits. It's a wonderful partnership, but it allows us to get a big bang for our buck because the county's contributing to those projects. And I'm trying to think, Paul, do we have any of those in 25? There you go. So Pioneer Road will be sort of that extra project in 25. But for the rest of reconstructions and normal maintenance, it'll be a pretty typical outlay.
Okay. Yeah, I just know, people always think there's more we could be doing. So I think hearing that we're at least not going to be spending less will be reassuring. So, yeah.
It's a good point. And, people say that to me. I'm sure you hear it a lot, all of you. And it's a balancing act, right? It's how much money are we going to, how much debt are we going to issue to do a certain volume of street maintenance and repair every year? I suppose you could go to the limits of your debt to do that, but then you're not managing your debt very well, and you're spiking your spending, and that causes problems down the road with the levy, because the levy can be affected by your debt payments as well. So those are things we take into consideration.
Mm-hmm. All right. Are there any other questions from council? Seeing none, thank you so much again for the presentations. Did you have something to add?
I was just going to add that thanks for all the feedback, and also this. I started by saying this is, I think, the most important decision any governing body makes about the various budgets and the capital improvement. We put everything in the budget, and we put everything in a capital improvement plan, and I preface what I'm going to say about the fire on Monday night to say that now we're going to add a park building to the CIP. Now, that is a project. Also in the CIP, you'll see an increase in revenue because we're going to get an insurance payment. But we put it all in there. So you're authorizing the building, the spending, and, you know, then Tricia will make sure that that's properly noted, that that's one of those other revenues that you find in the CIP. But I just wanted you to know, because people may ask you, there's been a lot of chatter about, is that building going to, you know, get fixed, get rebuilt? It's going to get rebuilt, and, you know, but it'll be in the CIP.
Thank you. I appreciate
You're welcome.
that
Thanks again.
additional information. Well, and I'm looking forward to all of our presentations coming up. Mr. DeVries, your department first, so lots of great information to come. And with that, that will end our input items. So I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn. Second.
Motion by Mr. Zimmerman, second by Mr. Heisler. This is not debatable. Please proceed to vote. Oh. My thing crashed, but I'm an aye. And that passes unanimously. We are adjourned. Of course, my thing would crash if I just were trying to end the meeting.
Good work all the way around.